Hey devs, April here. Welcome to another Learn with Experts live stream. In this series, I invite folks to deep dive into a particular feature while giving you the opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. This channel is all about helping you be the best Appian developer you can be, so make sure that you subscribe to never miss new videos or live streams. I have a couple announcements at the end, so make sure you stick around. The goal of today's live stream is to show you how Appian makes it easy to not only set up and interact with external systems through connected systems and integrations, but also to have other systems interact with Appian through web APIs. So, question for the audience, what was your first experience using integrations? Now, we really want you to be a part of the conversation throughout, so don't be a stranger. I'll be monitoring the chat throughout the stream so that we can answer your questions. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to bring out Senior Product Manager Colton Walker and Product Evangelist Sam Knecht. Hey guys.
Hello. How's it going?
Great. So Colton, welcome to your first live stream experience. Can you please just introduce yourself to the audience? How did you get into being the integration PM?
Thanks, April. Happy to be here. So I first joined Appian right out of college in 2016, where for my first year and a half, I was in our consulting department working on customer projects. And I really learned a lot about the platform firsthand during that time. But at the end of 2017, I came over to the engineering department to apply sort of some of the things I had learned about integrating to the platform and hopefully make some broader impacts on Appian.
Great. And, you know, we have a lot of ex-consultants becoming product managers. So we have a lot of people working on features that they know from experience what would be helpful to developers out there. And Sam, you're a familiar face, but for anyone who hasn't seen you before, quick intro from your end.
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Sam Knecht. I'm a product evangelist here at Appian, and I've been with Appian for around 15 months, maybe a little longer, but I've enjoyed every second. It's been great.
Yeah, I mean, 15 months is 5 releases, so you're already a pro for sure.
Lots of changes. Yeah.
So let's jump right into it. So when we're thinking about connecting to third-party systems, it helps to frame the question as which system is initiating the call. So when Appian is calling other systems, we create connected systems and integrations. And when Appian is being called by other systems, we create web APIs. And we're going to go through and show you all of those objects today. So Sam, can you introduce the use case for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So our use case today is all around event planning. So we're going to be pulling events from an external system, SeatGeek. I'm sure some of you might be aware of that for buying tickets to certain events. We're going to be pulling those events actually into our interface here so that we can interact with them. We can see some events that are going on in the area. We're able to click into them and maybe even buy a ticket into one of these. So that's kind of the use case around what we're going to be working with. But obviously, I don't have this event data sitting in my database anywhere. So we're going to be using, as April said, connected systems and integrations to be able to pull that data in from an external source and then be able to interact with it, as I mentioned earlier. So that's kind of what we'll be doing today.
Perfect. So before we jump into Appian, this is talking about connecting with third-party systems, which means we're going to have to use third-party resources to help us get started. And there's a few things that we'll need from the documentation from these other systems to be able to create these objects. So Sam, why don't you jump into the SeatGeek documentation? And then Colton, maybe you can give us a little overview of the things we should be looking for in docs.
Yeah. So the first things that we're going to be interested in is, what are the URLs that we want to hit? A lot of the other decisions are going to come downstream from there. And you can see right there your nice base URL, as well as the resource endpoints for the different services that the SeatGeek platform offers. The next question I always have is, what kind of authentication does this system use? Is it going to require a username and password or what? And as you can see right near the top, it's telling me that you're going to have a client ID and client secret that you can get from the SeatGeek developers page, which we'll go through a little bit later. Interestingly, it looks like these are getting passed via basic authentication. So the client ID is a username and the client secret's a password. Like I said, or like I sometimes say, there's a lot of different ways to authenticate these API calls, but Appian works with pretty much all of them.
Yeah, and when we create our connected system, we can see a list of what some of those are, and we actually have a question around authentication. So I'll bring that up when we get there. And you know, different documentation will look a little different, but we can always kind of find these same things. So I actually asked Sam to pull up a few different docs. So we have the SpaceX API docs, right? So again, we're seeing our base URL. And then if we scroll down, we can see, oh, how do we page through? How do we authenticate? And then, what endpoints can we use? And to make kind of an Appian analogy for those who maybe haven't used integrations, the endpoint is kind of like a record, right? It's like a single like resource of a certain type. So in our example, we're using events. And then parameters, that's, similar to query parameters in Appian. What are the things that we want to get? And then authentication, maybe you could think about that kind of like security, making sure we have access to get in there. So yeah, we also have the Pokemon API. So here are some docs there. I love using that one. And then even Verint. So this is our current Appian community platform. And we use these APIs to actually pull data about our community's contributions. So for example, the forum reply endpoint, this is a way that we can pull to see who has the most verified answers and suggested answers. So just a quick plug that if you are using community and you ask a question and someone helps you out, please make sure that you verify that an answer has helped you so that we can see who are the best answerers out there in community. All right, so that's it for docs. Let's jump into Appian and get started. So we are going to start with building a web service backed record. So Sam, why don't you get us going with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is going to look familiar to everyone. Everyone's probably already created records at this point. And obviously you have these kind of existing data source types that you can select, or you could use our codeless data modeling. But as April said, we're going to do our web service back record today. We're going to go through here, and I'm going to start to kind of follow the forward flow that Appian gives us to create our record data source. And maybe as I go through here and start to configure, Colton, you can kind of guide us through on what I'm doing and kind of what some of the options are as we're configuring.
Sure thing. Yeah, so Appian often takes a very record-centric design approach, and so we want you to be able to start here. And as a result, we've built in some forward flows that allow you to enter through the record type designer and still generate all the objects that you need.
Lost you, Colton. Oh, he might be back. Let us know in the chat if you could see Colton, but maybe Sam, you could just explain for a second until we confirm that Colton is back.
Yeah, we'll see if he's back or not.
Yeah, it looks like he's back. All right.
Okay, great.
All right, Colton, awesome. Get back into it. Sam's like, I don't want to be on the hook for this.
Perfect. Yeah. So like I was saying, once you put in the name and description, there's a specific field for base URL, and so you can find that in the API documentation and paste it in. This is important because it's going to get inherited by all the integrations that you create from this connected system. And it'll be inherited by those integrations so that when you deploy to higher environments, you can point to different environments in the other system as well. Then down below, you'll see the authentication dropdown like we talked about before. And there are a number of different authentication types that we have here, including API key, which is pretty common, Amazon's AWS signature v4 auth type, the Google service account authentication, several varieties of OAuth 2, which is a modern standard for authenticating web services, and then basic, which as we saw in the documentation is the one we're going to want today.
Cool. Yeah. So while we're on this authentication topic, let me pose the question from the chat to you, Colton. So Stefan says he has some clients that have really specific authentication requirements that are not currently supported out of the box. Are there plans to make that a little bit more flexible in the future, or do you have any suggestions there?
There are a few plans for that. For one thing, we do have the integration SDK, which allows you to build connected system plugins yourself, and you can pretty much support any authentication type via that. But I know that these out-of-the-box connected systems are also very nice. And there's a feature that I've been sort of kicking around that's going to involve setting, custom parameters with any name that you want, sending it to a token endpoint that you can specify. And then it will, return an access token to you ideally, and you'll be able to use that access token to authenticate APIs. We're sort of still speccing it out, but it's definitely on our radar. So if you have any more details about maybe a specific type of authentication that you have, feel free to send me an email and I'll check it out.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Colton. And email colton.walker@appian.com. So Stefan, feel free to shoot an email over. And for anyone on the stream that maybe that went over your head a little bit, let's get back into the basics of setting something up. So we have authentication first. So where do we get this from?
Yeah, so as Colton mentioned, we're going to use basic authentication, which was pulled directly from the docs for SeatGeek. You can see it, as we mentioned earlier, it's going to use that basic. So actually here within our developer ops, we have our client ID and client secret available. So it's just going to be as simple as copying and pasting those values over into our username and password field. So one thing to keep in mind, you do not want to lose these. So I think it's pretty common. April, you can talk to this too. You do not want to lose this because then you got to go create a new one. And I think you only get to see it like once. And so it's always important to maybe save that information before you end up closing out of that window.
Yeah, and they'll usually give you a warning about that. And you'll see later when we create an Appian web API that using an Appian API key, you will also see this is your only chance. Copy it now. Cool. All right. So we have the connected system, and this is basically giving us a starting point so that every time we integrate to SeatGeek, we don't have to set up all this stuff again. It's just really easy to make an integration. So again, this forward flow, it's started with, all right, make your connected system. You can also use an existing if you have it already. And then we can create an integration right from here. And again, use an existing if we have it already. So the integration object, one thing I love is it's very Appian, right? It's very easy to kind of use and walk through, and it makes you feel great to be able to do something that's a little bit more complex in such an easy way. So as Sam's creating that, we'll be able to jump in there and see what that looks like. But Colton, I see we have to make an integration, expression rule. Why do we need to do all this to make a web service back record?
So an integration uses a common language across the internet, HTTP requests and HTTP responses. So when you call an integration, an HTTP response will come back with things like, a status code, a body, headers, and parameters. This expression rule, as you can see in the description, is going to call that integration and then transform the response into a data subset, which is one of sort of the Appian specific languages. And that's going to let the record type designer interpret what came back from the integration and fit it into, that nice record shaped data structure.
Perfect. All right, Sam, let's keep going with creating this.
Yeah.
And we have this sync in batches. Yeah. Let us know what this is.
Yeah. Colton, I thought I'd let you take this one.
Sure thing. So we've looked at
the expert here. I want to let the expert handle it.
Yeah, we've looked at this API before, and if you go into the documentation, you'd be able to find it, but you can take our word for it in this case. And maybe it will. Does it? So we know that this can return up to 50 records per page, 50 events. And the default's 10, but we want to pull back everything into Appian. We want this record to encompass all of the events in the entire API, not just the first 50. So we're going to need to sync it in batches. And that's going to see Appian iterating over those integration calls and calling and getting the first page back, then the second page back, then the third page back, until we have all of the events in Appian. And once they're there, we can do whatever we want with that data.
Yeah. And, this is very common, right, Colton? I mean, most of the time when we're integrating with external systems and Appian projects, you have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, right? So you'll need to do a big batch.
Yes, and it wouldn't be advisable to return 100,000 rows in one call. Most APIs wouldn't even let you do it. So this is kind of how we address that.
Yeah, so Appian's max is 1,000, but it could also depend on the external system, right? SeatGeek's max is 50. All right, so let's jump into the integration object and see what we got going there.
Yeah, so integration is a good place to start. I like to sort of build and test these things from the inside out because this thing can work on its own. The expression rule doesn't work till the integration does, so it's a good place to start.
Mm-hmm. You can see Appian kind of automatically created our integration and record data source objects for us, and it gives us that liberty to go in and update them how we see fit. Like April said earlier, adding query parameters, adding relative paths so that we're pulling the correct data that we might need. Handling like request response logging, all that stuff. We can kind of go in and tweak that based on how we would like it to look. So maybe before we start going through, we can just take a look and go through the sections of the integration design object, and then we can actually start to configure.
Sure. So up at the top, you have sort of the most basic parts of this. So you're going to need to know the URL, and that builds off the relative path, or excuse me, it builds off the base URL using a relative path. You also have the method here, which is sort of like, do I want to read from this API? Do I want to write to this API? Do I want to delete something? It's worth noting that, it's ultimately up to the API itself. So you're really going to want to go look at the documentation and just see what the service specifies. Some endpoints will actually allow for multiple methods. Timeout gives you a little bit more control about how long you want to let this HTTP request hang out there before you get a response. Eventually, you may want to cut the integration off and error handle accordingly. Then we get down into headers and parameters. These are ways to specify additional information to the service. So sometimes it'll say like return all equals true, and that will get rid of paging. That's not offered for this specific API. But you can also filter down and say like, I only want to see events for one state, or I want to see events returned in alphabetical order or by date. Again, these headers and parameters, and really most of the information in this pane over here, they're coming from the API. So you're going to want to basically make this screen match what you're seeing in the API documentation.
Yep. And also usually with auth, we'll pass that through in the query parameters or in the header. But since we made the connected system and set up the auth there, we don't have to specify that over and over every time we make it.
Right. I skipped over that. I didn't even. Yeah, the authentication is almost always going to be handled in the connected system. We have it in Integration Designer so that I guess one, you don't need a connected system, but we do definitely recommend it. And two, just to preserve existing integrations. But
Cool. And then I see also we have response and logging. So Colton, if you want to just mention that briefly, and a reminder to the chat, if you have integration questions, throw them in for Colton.
Yeah, response is actually going to, we're going to talk about that once we make the first call, but it'll allow you to sort of take that HTTP response that comes back and, process it accordingly. One of those things is turning it into a dictionary that Appian can read from.
Cool.
And then HTTP request and response logging. So this is important. It's kind of a newer feature that we have, and I think it's a really cool one. You have to go down and explicitly check this box. And when you do, though, it'll log the raw HTTP requests that this integration makes, along with the responses that come back from the other system. And this is really important once applications go live, because then when users are out there using the integration that you build and the applications that they serve, when something goes wrong, you're not going to have to try to go back and guess what happened and recreate it. You can just go see, oh, this is the request they made, this is the response they came back, and then you can troubleshoot from there. The reason that we make you opt into this is because integrations can send all kinds of stuff back and forth. There could be like a social security number, personally identifiable information. So we want to make sure that you really think about the data that this integration is sending and receiving before you check this box.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right, let's test it.
One final note. There's a link down there to the integration guidelines. So if you want more information on the Lineage blog, check that out.
Yeah, we have great documentation. I always love shouting out our own docs team. So everything you need is there too. All right, let's see. Does it work? Let's try it. Test.
Let's see. We haven't configured anything. Let's see what happens. Okay. So this is how Appian kind of does a really good job with error handling. Is you can see it doesn't see our specified URL. We did provide a base URL, but you can see we have yet to provide a relative path. And so that's something we want to go look at the docs here is what are some of those relative paths based on what we want to look for? In our case, we want events. So I'm actually going to go in and add to our relative path there, the events. And so that'll tell it where to look. And if we test again, you can see now we are correctly pulling. We got a success. Always love to see that green box. And now we have the data that we might need. And Colton, I know you were touching on this earlier about converting JSON to Appian. Do you want to maybe touch on that a little more?
Yeah, it says it right there. The result is a JSON response. That's a common language that these RESTful services transmit data back and forth in. And we can convert that into an Appian value. And it's even got a link right there. So if you click that, it'll, you click it again, you can see a nice tree structure. And this is something that you can just dot into using Sail.
Yeah, and I think it makes it a lot easier to read in an Appian structure. You're able to kind of work with the drop downs. and just get a look to make sure that you're pulling the correct data. So you can see we have some MLS matches, a theater performance, a music festival. So it looks like we're starting to get some data that looks a little more that looks useful to us. But I think what we want to do next is maybe add a query parameter so that you can see this one's in Florida, this one is in Kentucky. So we're kind of all over the place. I think if we were looking for events, we wouldn't be looking all over the world. We'd be looking in more of a centralized location that maybe we'd be traveling to. And so I thought maybe we could add a query parameter into here that focuses on a certain state.
Let's do it. So maybe it's just state. We could try just state.
Yeah.
And see how
So
that works.
sometimes it's just like, let's just try state. Let's say we're traveling to Illinois. So let's test it out and see what happens. So nope, doesn't like that. So again, I think this is kind of a kudos to Appian of it makes it very easy to see what's going on, and then you can go into the documentation to make sure your change has been fixed. So let's actually go into our docs here for SeatGeek, and let's scroll down and actually look into how we can pull events based on a certain state. So you can see now we're kind of into the events section here, and we want to look at this argument here. So there is a venue argument, and it can set it to a specific venue. And you can also drill into the state. And so this is kind of the structure we're going to want to follow here is this venue.state. So let's give that a try.
Yeah, and if you go back real quick, just as a quick note, you can see there are example requests over on the right, which will show you sort of the format that you'd expect to come back in. Looks like the 2-letter code was the right instinct, but it should give you an example telling you what you need to do.
Yeah, that's a good call. I could have typed out Illinois. So it's always good to see kind of the structure, how you should be formatting your inputs. All right, let's give it a try. Cool. Let's just make sure we got Illinois. Okay, so we're pulling all the Illinois stuff, so that's great. Looks like that's in a good spot, but I think the last thing that we need to do here is the paging with the batch number, because as Colton mentioned, we don't want to pull just the first 50, or I guess in this case, the first 10 as we've designated it. So far, because 10 is the default. And so we are going to add 2 more query parameters, and that is going to be, I skipped past it. So let's scroll back up. That is going to be our, where is it?
I think you passed it again.
There it is, our pagination. So you can see there's 2 kind of arguments that we want to include, per page and page. And so I really like how Appian sets this up, because I can kind of just easily input the information that I want. And so we want, per page, we want to pull 50 kind of records, I guess you could say, and then page is going to be what Appian does. So when they're actually doing the batching, it'll kind of loop through, and so all we're going to do is just push in that batch number that we mentioned earlier, and Appian will handle the rest of kind of going through our batches. And so, do we want to test this again with a certain batch number? What do you think?
I think starting with 1 is good. And yeah, so batch number 1, like we said, Appian is going to pass the value of 1, 2, 3, etc. until this API returns an empty set of data.
Yeah. If you could scroll up a little bit, Sam, in the response, there should be, and I don't remember where it is, but there should be a place that tells you how many there are.
Yeah.
Might be easier to see when we're actually in the expression rule. But but this is, these query parameters, right? A lot of times when working with integrations in Appian, a lot of the struggles might come from not setting things up in a way that your external system you're talking to understands. So really making sure you're going through the docs, writing the query parameters in the correct way. When it comes to paging, making sure that you know what base index the connected system is. So in this case, SeatGeek tells you page 1 is 1, but there are a lot of connected systems or a lot of external systems where in their docs it'll say page 1 is actually page 0. So you might have to specify RI-bang batch number -1 to be able to do that.
So can you go back to the integration real quick and just see how there's events underbody? Can you collapse that?
Yeah, it looks like the output is
I see.
too large.
All right, no worries.
Yeah.
The other things I would do real quick is try a batch number of 2 to make sure that works.
And maybe see what the first event is, so we know it's a different event. Or, this is Chicago Symphony. Maybe put like batch 10.
Yeah.
And then we got
Another Chicago Symphony,
but
but
the
different
type
date.
changed. Yeah,
Different date. Yeah.
type changed.
Yeah.
And
When-
then try like 1,000 maybe for the batch number. You just want to make sure it doesn't error out when you go out of bounds.
Perfect.
And you can
So
see
yeah.
it returns an empty set. And there you can see the metadata that's coming back.
Yeah.
This is kind of what you were mentioning, April, with the total kind of values that are being pulled, that are possible to be pulled based on the parameters that we provided, such as Illinois being the state.
Yeah. All right, cool. That's our integration object. And now we have our expression rule that, again, that forward flow is creating for you and giving you a template. So like Colton was saying, we're using the language of the internet when we're getting these things back, but we want to translate that into the language that Appian knows. So we will create this template for you. And we have a lot of great comments kind of letting you know what you need to do. This sometimes, depending on how the response is coming, you may need to do a little bit more massaging, but this is a great starting point. So we can see that it will, change this to a dictionary for us, but this is a lot of data that we don't really need. So Sam, actually, you already created an expression rule that will kind of just parse through this and get exactly what we're looking for.
I did. It's just going to make it a little cleaner and kind of pull the data that we were looking for so that we can make meaning out of it. And so I just have this quick rule I'm going to call, and you can see when I test again, open this up, it's in a more clean structure, kind of pulling the data that we were looking for. So it looks like, oh, we got Peppa Pig. That could be a popular one.
Yeah.
All sorts of stuff. Yeah. So you can see it's kind of giving us the data that we're looking for. What is the event? Where is it at? Address, the date and time. So now we can kind of use this to input into our record as desired.
Cool. And Colton, just one question. How does Appian know when to stop going through and adding one to the batch?
So it's going to keep going until it returns a successful call that has no data in it. So if an error comes back when you're out of bounds, that's something you're going to need to handle in this expression rule. And you can sort of see that described in the instructions that's in the definition over there. But what this is going to do is keep going. And as long as data is coming back in the response, it's going to then call it again with the next highest batch number, 1, 2, 3, until something comes back with no data in it.
Okay. Cool. All right, let's finish setting up the record and let's keep going with our stream here.
Yeah. So you can see it's successfully pulling in all of our data. It notices our fields that were received. So I'm just going to add our primary key and click finish. And it's pretty much as simple as that. I mean, now we have our record with all of our events that we might want to look at. And so we now have a record full of data. We can start to push this into our processes and our interfaces to maybe take action on it. And so you can see here, we're going to navigate back to our site object. Here's kind of some of the events that we were looking at. We have our events in Chicago. I'm actually going to clear this. So we can see we have all these events around Chicago. So should we buy some tickets? Should we go to some games or something?
Let's get some games. Let's go.
All right. I'm thinking I'll do this. I'll buy us tickets to the Raptors Bulls game. I'll cover those. So us three can go to those. But then April, I'll let you pick, but you got to cover the next one.
Let's see. Volleyball is pretty exciting. So maybe we could go to a volleyball game.
All right, let's do it. So let's do this one. All right, this one's going to be on your dime. I hope you don't mind.
All right.
And we'll do 3.
I'll get you guys on the next one.
Colton's like, next time, maybe.
Yeah, Colton, you're the guest, so we got you here.
Yeah.
All right.
So now you can see we kind of have our tickets purchased here. And quick plug, we have this really cool Google Maps connected integrated plugin interface, I guess. So we're able to pass in the location of these events, and it'll actually map it on the Google Maps here for us.
Yep. Always love an app market plug. We actually plugged Google Maps last week as well. So there you go with that. Okay. Also, I just wanted to go back, Sam. So I know sync started with our record, but how can we go check the status of that?
Yeah. So it looks like it was completed. Took about 22 seconds. Obviously, we had the batches, and we had several batches. And it looks like we were successfully pulled 3,788 rows. So that was all the data that was being pulled based on the query parameters that we provided it.
Cool.
Yeah, if you go back real quick to the integration, I think it still has a response there where you can see the total number is 3788 down there at the bottom. And that's something that you can sort of verify the total number of synced rows against to make sure that you're getting all the data back that you would expect.
Yeah.
A couple more quick notes I wanted to make about this. You saw how the API can filter down based on state. It can also sort, alphabetical order, dates and stuff like that. And this is all sort of dependent on what the API offers. But now that the data is all in Appian, we can sort and filter on any field that you have without the need to do any API enhancements or anything like that.
Yep.
Now that the data is in Appian in a consistent way that we know about, you can just use any of those fields, and it'll not only is the functionality there, it's very performant. We're optimizing it to be fast.
And not only that, all the things we know and love about records we can use with this. We can set up relationships to database-backed records and everything like that, right? So once we get everything into an Appian record, then, it makes it even easier to keep going from there. Now, all right, so we did the first part, right? We showed how we get things from external systems into Appian, and Sam made this nice little site to show how you can then take that and make anything in Appian like you normally would. But the other part of the coin is maybe another system wants to call things from Appian. So we actually just released a new doc page called Connecting Appian to Custom Websites with a Web API. We'll get that thrown in the chat. But maybe sometimes you're using another website builder or something, but you still want to get that Appian data. We can make Appian web APIs so other systems can then do what we've just done and use the Appian data somewhere else. So let's get started setting that up. Colton, what do we have to do to get started there?
Well, the first thing that we're going to want to do is create a web API object. And as you can see, there's a number of different common use cases here that we've templated for you so that, we can just get you started just like the forward flows with the records. In this case, I believe we're trying to query a record type. So you select that. It tells you what method you want, all that stuff.
Yep. So I'm just going to fill out kind of some of the basic information here that Appian wants us to provide. We'll put that. We'll give it a pretty simple endpoint that makes sense to us. So just tickets. And then similar to what we did with integrations, we are going to do the we want to do the logging as well so that we can make sure that we have those logs for monitoring.
Yeah. And this endpoint, right? Like we were getting events and then we did something with them in Appian and had a ticket record. And now we're actually taking that other record and creating a web API for it, right? So this is not so another system can get all the events we pulled from SeatGeek, just those things that we said, oh, we want tickets for this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So another system can reach out to Appian and say what tickets have people purchased.
Yep. Cool. All right. Let's keep going.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and create that. I'm just going to save the default security that Appian gives us, and it's going to jump us right into the viewer here. And so, as you can see, we kind of have a couple options here. Again, query parameters and headers. That's kind of in path. That's familiar terminology that we've been working with integrations. But if we just go ahead and actually test this right off the bat, you can see it's going to pull our two records. So obviously, I bought some tickets, and April bought some tickets. So right out of the bat, we didn't have to do anything. I mean, we just created the object and then Appian constructed our expression for us so that it can pull all the correct data. But I think we don't want it to pull all the data. We really just want it to pull the data or the tickets that maybe I've purchased or have the option to filter on tickets that I've purchased.
Right.
And so we're just going to add a query parameter here. This is kind of where we can customize it to our liking, where we want to kind of query or filter based on that email. And so we'll put my email in. But for this to happen, we do need to add our query filter within our query record type here. So I'm just going to do that real quickly. Hopefully my typing is good.
Your typing's always good, Sam. You're great at these. So you'll see in a second, but Colton, I just want to prompt you to talk about it when we see it. Sam's not using a rule input or anything. We're using this HTTP bang request. Why are we using that instead of what we know as rule inputs or local variables when we're setting this up?
Yeah, so unlike a lot of our objects, this is not Appian passing data into this web API. It's another system passing the data into a web API. So again, we're going to be using that language of the internet that we keep talking about, the HTTP request and response. And that request will have aspects to it like, again, the method, the URL, maybe a request body, and then query parameters and HTTP headers. And so as you probably saw on the left, if you type in HTTP bang request, it'll suggest these things to you. See the body, the headers, all that stuff. And as we know, the API that we're going to call it with is going to pass a parameter called email that contains the value of the email address that we want to sort on. And in that middle pane, you can see what that looks like.
Yeah, and what we specify here, similar to how when we tried to filter by state for the SeatGeek one and we just put state instead of venue.state, we need to make sure, and if you're troubleshooting from that other system, hey, why isn't this Appian call working? Like maybe they put email address when it should be email here. So you got to make sure that we're speaking the same language on both sides and we're lining up. So definitely something to look for.
Here, we're the ones setting the contract. So you could call email anything. Email makes sense here. We're saying you need to pass us a parameter called email, and then it's up to the client that's calling this to, follow that contract accordingly.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. All right. And we can see, Sam, you tested it with just your email. And now instead of showing both of ours, we see just yours. Okay. So this is in Appian. How do I trust that we can actually get to this from somewhere else?
I'm going to show you. We're going to do a little test. And so we're going to pull up our good friend Postman here. And I thought maybe real quickly before we actually showed how we could pull and grab this data from Appian, maybe Colton, did you want to explain what Postman is just for anyone who's unaware?
It's got a lot of similar functionality to Integration Designer. It's a way that you can enter in the method, the URL, the different parameters and headers, but it's just a generic HTTP client that can call web services for you.
And so you can see we kind of need to give it's going to be very similar again, our base URL. So I'm actually going to pull that. You can see here we have our base URL. I'm going to go up to tickets because that is our endpoint. It looks like. And I apologize for all the back and forth here. It's probably the best way I can show. So we have our URL there of tickets. And then we also need to grab, because when you are integrating with Appian, you need to have an Appian API key. And so that is something that we can show of, that would be something that you would need to get from somebody or from the system. And so we can actually go show how we create that. And then we'll put that code into here and then we'll give it a quick test and see how it works.
Right. And, Appian, very secure, right? You need to create these in the admin console. So only certain people might have access to be able to actually do this. And, Appian is not like the SpaceX or Pokemon API where you can just get into Appian without any authentication, right? We want to make sure everything is protected. So go over to admin console, web API authentication, and then it's as easy as filling out a couple fields. So
we'll just give it a pretty easy description. We already have a service account, so we will go ahead and create that. And then again, gives you the warning that you are not going to be able to see this again. So let's just copy it to our clipboard with the link here.
I think this warning is a little better than the SeatGeek one because it's yellow instead of green.
Yeah, green means good, and it's like no.
Yeah. All right, so let's
we have our
throw
API key. Let's go ahead and dump that into here. Good. And then let's test. Oh, actually, let's do our parameter. How about that? Do we want to add our email parameter?
Yeah.
So let's say, as mentioned, we designated it as email. If we designated it as email address, I would just put an email address. As I said, we're going to kind of want to speak the same language that Appian is speaking. And we only want to see tickets that I've bought. So sorry, April, we're only going to see my tickets, but
I could take other people to the volleyball game, so it's fine.
Yeah, you could. I would hope not. That would hurt my feelings. But
all right.
Okay,
so this should work, right? We have the auth.
Yeah, why not? Let's give it a try. And no, it does not like that. You can see we have a 401 unauthorized. So kind of have a small little error message here, but it looks like we're unauthenticated.
Yeah. So Colton, if we made the API key, why isn't it working?
Well, API keys are specifically scoped to individual users or service accounts in this case, but you want to make sure that that service account only has access to the resources that you want it to have access to. So they need to have access to both the web API that they're calling and the record type that they're trying to query.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
and you can see here our service account is not present in our admin group, which our admin group does have access to all those objects. It kind of is our master group, and so because it's not in there, it's technically saying that hey, I don't have access to any of this stuff, and so I'm unauthorized to make this call. So we're just going to simply throw them into that account or into that group here, and that should solve our authentication problem, and it does. Perfect.
Eureka.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and of course you can have much more granular access control than just putting someone into an administrator group, but for the purposes of this demo, it gets the point across.
Yeah, and if you wanted to go further as to like add further fields to like what did you want the call to return, I could simply just go in here and return maybe the event data as well. So I see at this point that I purchased tickets to an event, but I don't know what that event is. So if we just update that, you can now see that I also have our related event data if we needed it for our Raptors at Bulls game. So you kind of have that flexibility to, from the web API, customize what data is being returned.
Wow, Sam, we didn't go through that when we were planning this live stream, and I think it's awesome that you just added it. And also, I was looking over at the chat, so I was not paying attention for a second. Look back over, and suddenly you have related record data in like a few seconds. It's crazy. Love
it is. I mean, Appian
records.
it makes it so easy because, like you said, now that once we were able to pull the data from SeatGeek and have it into a record, like you said, April, you can start to do so much with it. You can create related records, filter, start to take action on it. So it really opens up the realm of possibilities to work within the platform itself.
Perfect. So I'll give one final chance, chat, if you have any questions for Colton or Sam, but maybe Sam, since you don't come from a traditional coding background, can you tell us a little bit about your first experience with integrations and how Appian helped you understand it and pick it up a little easier?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, integrations are not my strong suit. I think Appian makes it very easy. Like April said, I don't come from a computer science background. I used to be a mechanical engineer at an automotive company, so like I never really worked with like a software like Appian before in my life until I got here. And so I think my first experience with an integration was actually one of my first earlier projects with Appian when I updated our SpaceX course with new features, and I had to work with the integration and all that. And just working with the documentation, as I had it open earlier, but the documentation is your master document. So when you're working with integrations, this is going to be your best friend. It's going to give you all the information that you may need to input parameters, have your authentication, make sure that you're following and everything. And if you ever run into an error with that red box, you can read the error. It'll give you some insight and some tips, but this will also be your best friend is your documentation as well. So I think that was a big learning moment for me, was to really rely on the documentation for help.
Yeah, for sure. And Colton, do you have any last tips for anyone working with integrations, or anything you see when you're talking to customers about how they're using integrations? Words of wisdoms for developers out there who are just getting started.
Sure thing. Yeah. I mean, it's just helpful to try and think about how it's very similar to what Sam just said with the API documentation being your master document. I like to pull it up on two different screens, Integration Designer on one side and the API documentation on the other, and kind of just make them match, because the sections of the Integration Designer will usually line up with the sections that you see in the documentation. I also want to plug one more time that new HTTP request response logging. It will save you a lot of heartache in production. You'll be able to just see all the calls and get to the bottom of different issues that might arise without having to think about it.
Yeah, and that logging, that'll be over in the system logs, which is a whole nother can of worms that we could go down. And I don't know, let us know in the chat or in the comments if you're watching the recording of this later. Do you want to see a live stream that's around using the system logs and troubleshooting? Let us know. Great. So I don't see any more questions. I thought this was a really great use case and really came full circle. So Sam, thanks so much for developing it. Colton, thanks for coming on and sharing all of your expert knowledge. So some announcements before we close out here. Shape the future of Appian's product offerings with your insights. Take our survey for a chance to win a free pass to Appian World, certification vouchers, and more. So that's over at surveymonkey.com/r/2023 Appian Developer Survey. Appian Dev Survey, excuse me. Links in the chat, and is also on the community homepage. Other announcement, Appian Europe, it's less than a month away, just a few weeks actually, and I will be over there in London hosting the Live Build Challenge in person. But if you can't make it in person, we will be having a watch party live stream hosted by Sam. So that'll be a great chance to hang out with him more. And there will be some fun interactive elements to that virtual live stream watch party. So we really hope you check it out. To our lovely audience, thanks so much for joining today. If you enjoyed the stream, please hit that like button. Let us know. If you have more questions, ideas for future streams, drop a comment below and head over to the community discussion boards. Make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next one. Sam, Colton, thanks so much. Hope you had fun and hope to see you in a future live stream as well.
Thanks, April.
Bye, guys.
Bye.